Good morning. So sorry, I have no return here, so I have to turn. So I will try to be focused on the slides. So I would like to present you, one of the unofficial story of IT security and especially cryptography, and to talk about what was in the past, the present, and the recent news with the Prism case are rather interesting in this context, and of course what will be the future regarding information and information security. So the first question is, do you just ask the question, is it possible to enable total security for everyone? Of course the answer is no, as disturbing it may be, because in fact you have to deal with national security issues, strategic dominance, and of course economic warfare. The Iron Curtain has fallen in 1989, but the Cold War has been replaced by another form of war, which is economic warfare. So in fact, in this context, it is very important to keep in mind that we cannot live without control. The problem is who is enforcing this control. I would like to show you a few examples among many others. I have gathered many information about backdoors and so on. So the first one, we are hearing very much about backdoors in Huawei and ZTE equipment. Well, but probably less about Cisco backdoors. The problem is by which I want to be monitored. Unfortunately, in France, we have no longer Alcatel router. We have to choose between Chinese and US, and for me, it's very disturbing. But many other examples. For example, Canada and equipment, backdoor at the hardware level. I remember that Canada was a founding member of the Echelon network. And so on. More recently, Microsoft. And when Microsoft bought Skype, very soon the problem of embedding trapdoors arose. FBI and backdoors on internet services. But it is a long history, as we are going to see. Facebook. When Google recruit people of high-ranking officers from the DARPA, so an avatar from the Department of Defense in the United States, or more recently NSA and the Prism project, but Prism is just only a new avatar in a long series of such projects. Windows Phone. More recently at the CCC 2011, well, some very intriguing technical features in electric devices. The attack by our friend against Élysée, using Facebook and the fact that we have a very famous operating system everywhere. Here, the Prism project, you have the list. I'm sure it is not the complete list. But you have here the project, the graphical user interface of the Carnivore project. Carnivore was a little bit aggressive. So later it was renamed DCS 10,000, less aggressive. But in fact, since the beginning of the early 2000s, all the internet services driven by the US were monitored. You have here the graphical interface. If people are interested, I have also the technical description and technical documents. So, in fact, before World War II, there was no control. It was possible to sell crypto machine, for example, Hagelin, a Swedish company. But of course, with the Enigma, with Purple, and so on, you know probably the history. It was obvious that it was necessary to control the technology. And after World War II, actually at the very end of the 40s, in fact, a lot of controls have been put in place and enforced. Of course, this it was just called export control at the beginning. It was totally impossible to sell sensitive technologies, for example, to the Soviet Union. More recently, we have the rise of the terrorism at the very early of 2000. But in fact, during the end of the World War II, many controls have been put in place. So what you have here a lot of, among many other terms that probably means many things to you. I would like to explain some of them. The main problem at the present time that the control is no longer enforced only by the nation state to protect their own citizens. We have control performed by only a very few number of multinationals. We all know the names. And, well, do you accept that someone else, except your country, pretend to protect your privacy, protect your life, protect your family? And of course, your companies. It is a national security and economic issue, and it is not a simple problem. So, I will focus, of course, on cryptography. So I say, of course, because in fact, it is a more illustrative example. In fact, whatever may be the security device or mechanism you can consider, you have cryptography as a very, very low level. But in fact, it is very easy to broaden the debate, because if you have a strong algorithm, it is the syndrome of the armored door on the wallpaper. In fact, you can do a lot of attacks at the hardware level, software level. You can even work at the regulation and standards level, and so on. So do not focus only on the armored door. There are many, many other things to take into account. So I would like just to recall some basic facts. You have two kinds of cryptography. Symmetric cryptography, which is based on information theory. It means that you have a lot of beginning of security proof. But as soon as you have a large key size, it is totally impossible to model and to analyze those systems. You have more internal states than particles in the universe. So, of course, more than any computer that could store it and process it. Asymmetric cryptography, which is very famous by now, what you know under the name public key. In fact, we have absolutely no proof of security. It is one of the biggest, most famous mathematical problems, which is open, still open. There is $1 million who will be able to solve it. It means, in fact, the problem is P equal to NP. In more familiar terms, does difficult problem really exist or not? It is an open problem, but all the security of asymmetric cryptography is based on that assumption. And what is very interesting, and not to say surprising, that nowadays, when you are unable to prove the insecurity of something, it is a proof of security. As a scientific guy, I am very surprised of that kind of argument, especially when dealing with national security issue. So, honestly, we don't have any security proof regarding asymmetric cryptography. So, the aim is to present some of the aspects. Of course, I have a limited time, but I would like to make you think upon different issues. And the last line is interesting. Sometimes questions are more interesting than answers, because most of the nation state won't give you the answers. You have just to grab into the official and unofficial documentation to make your own mind. I've worked extensively on that point on those problems during nearly 20 years, so I would like to make some sort of summary. But of course, you are free to think differently. So, first, from the end of the World War II to around 1975. So recall it was during the Cold War. In fact, it was clear that it was necessary to prevent the spread of sensitive technology. But sensitive technology is not only cryptographic algorithm, it is GPS, for example. GPS was for a very long time limited. You have telecommunications, equipment, routers were even computers, and so on. So in fact, the project was a COCOM, which was the first international agreement to limit the spread of technology. And very surprising, in the United States, it was forbidden, for example, to export computers and supercomputers to France. During the 70s, France was already considered the rogue nation by the US. That's why the Japanese tried to develop an alternative in supercomputing with Fujitsu. But for a very long time, it was impossible in France to buy a Cray supercomputer. And even at the processor level, some instructions were, it was not possible to buy them when hard-coded. It was possible to have just emulated version. For example, the popcount instruction who count the number of one in a word. Very sensitive instruction when you do cryptanalysis. Well, so in fact, you have many facts, and we will come back to the crypto ID case, and you will see what we can think about this. Then the next phase, which you have, it was a phase when, during which the terrorism was rising, and of course it was the end of Cold War era. And of course, the classical backdoor, I mean, for example, mathematical backdoors and implementation backdoor were no longer possible. So, nation state applied a very simple principle: never put all your eggs inside basket. Diversify your approach. So, in 1994, I will speak again about that. The Wassenaar Agreement has replaced the COCOM, enlarging the control and making mandatory the application in each signing members. And a number of projects, at the present time we are speaking of PRISM, but PRISM, a very early avatar, was Socrates project, initiating with the Reagan 1982 discourse. You can read this discourse, it's very interesting. You have the evolution of the World Trade Agreement. We make mandatory to open your market, for example, to Cisco routers. Echelon, and the European community was very concerned about the fact that some antennas of Echelon were located in England, a member of the European community. And the academics enter the game, and they say, okay, we are the modern cryptology. Well, I'm a little bit joking because in fact RSA, which officially was born in 1977, in fact, I have recently a document has been published. The public cryptography has been at least invented 40 years ago by the Bell Labs for the Department of Defense in the United States. So that's why the role of academics should be maybe modified. I remember I was at Crypto 92, which is one of the biggest conferences in crypto. I remember during the RAM session a clash, a very violent clash between Gilmore from the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Brian Snow for the NSA. Gilmore said, okay, we need, even Saddam Hussein has right to have a very strong crypto. Why not Al-Qaeda at the same time? And I remember that clash, I was younger, but this clash was very surprising. So in fact, at the end of this phase, in fact, the threats moved on from a few Soviet or communist countries to any people, students, guy with an internet connection and a computer. That's why the control have to be diversified. The globalization phase from 2001 and around 2012, so very recent, in fact, we are a very strong rise of the terrorism and emerging countries. When you read some US document, it is clear that for the US, emerging countries are some sort of economic terrorists. And the multinational, the private sphere becomes the new dimension. The power is in multinationals. You have a lot of names. And what is interesting that there is some project in order to modify some, for example, cryptography standards. I am very surprised because in France, for example, we say, okay, cryptography must be free. So you had in around 2004 a big wind of freedom for cryptography. Generally, freedom means variety. At the present time, you only have one algorithm, AES 256. Well, it's not freedom, it's hegemony. And of course, you have the rise of networks, of computers, of vulnerabilities. I'm not sure that all vulnerabilities are linked to developers' incompetence or lack of knowledge. The best way to hide a trapdoor is just to say, oh, my developers are very bad. By Microsoft, they are bad since 20 years. I think they should do change of work. So, but different other aspects, for example, the state malware. From 2001 with Magic Lantern project, and very recently in France, for example, the LOPSI project, or the LOPSI law, or the Bundestrojan, we see that in fact there is a strong need to have some different features inside our operating system to enable the actions of nation states, police, intelligence, and so on. Once again, it's not shocking, because I want to be protected, I want my family to be protected. I want that France is protecting me, not United States or China for different interests. And of course, very interesting dimension, it's the rise at the end of the 80s of the hacker phenomenon. When I mean the rise, a big rise, it was, of course, it originated sooner, but in fact, the power of the hacker dimension enters the game in a very surprising and interesting way. The last phase we are currently in, it is a legal phase, the lawyer. In fact, the trends of G20 society is to consider a citizen as a potential criminal. And everything is built around this conception. So you have intellectual property mechanism. You know all those names. You have patent wars. And I think that Apple is probably stronger in law than probably in techniques. Software patents, war of standards. License agreement, honestly, you should read your license agreement. I don't think that you, unless being totally drunken, you would accept that you are accepting by installing software. Read your license agreement. Industrial agreement turning into monopolies. I am very terrified about the seizure of the Microsoft and Intel about the UEFI mechanism. Will it be possible to install Linux really without being signed before by Microsoft? It is an open question. Cybercriminality regulation and so on. And of course, especially in France, the demonization of hackers. The recent case of Vupen or Cause-Int are very illustrative in this respect. So, the case of cryptology. In fact, you have many control, and all G20 countries have enforced this control. It is very interesting. For example, you have this link, so the slide will be available, you will have everything. So, but for example, here, you have the list of all crypto regulations, and I think that you should go here. You have all the regulations with all the text. All countries are nowadays controlling cryptography. So you will see all the texts. There are plenty of them. But there is one mother regulation. The mother regulation, so for example, it was General de Gaulle, until now, make mandatory to use only national cryptographic algorithm for national use. I'm not sure that with NATO this is possible in the next few years. And the Wassenaar Agreement, very interesting. It is an international agreement. It is a mother regulation. You have here the list of the countries who are applying the control of our crypto, not only crypto, but in fact, you have 10 lists plus two more sensitive equipment lists. It is telephony, GPS, laser, many IT equipment and technology equipment. And cryptology is just in the list 5, part B. So read it, it's very interesting. We will come back with the applications of French regulation. So it's the first level of control. In fact, it is the good countries versus the rest of the world. Okay. Second level. So in France, for example, so I would like to show you. Once again, questions are more interesting than answers. So if you have a look to this French application of the Wassenaar Agreement, you have the same in all signing members. It says that in fact, if you want to export, sell or publish algorithm with cryptographic key of large size, you have to be authorized or to at least to declare what is a large key size. Let us go to category 1, annex appendix 2. But once again, it is an application of the US emanation law. So, by here, Article 13, a large key is more than 56 bits for symmetric crypto and 512. It means that if you sell AES 256, you are violating most of the G20 countries' law, unless there is some sort of other control, thanks to the IT community and IT vendors. And we come back to the fact that a cryptographic algorithm is just an armored door. If you install it on a weak wall, or if you let the window open, your armored door will be nothing. In fact, it is the evolution of the technology, the IT world, which make possible the control. So once again, the questions are more interesting than answers. Okay. So the practical application, any equipment, sensitive equipment has backdoors in a way or another. It's very difficult for NATO countries, but in fact, they have now to comply to the rule. And in fact, in the context of interoperability, you have to use US equipment. And you have 3 of the most famous, but it is mandatory to equip when you are a NATO country with Cisco routers, with McAfee antivirus, and with Microsoft operating system. The second level of control is the USA versus the rest of the world. And I will just quote a French member of the French Parliament, who was a specialist of defense issues, and he said that in fact the power of a country lies in the ability to impose standards. Many things are played at the certification and standardization board. Well, for example, during the AES contest, it was mandatory to submit a block cipher technology. It was not the problem of AES in itself. It was the standard, cryptography standards which should be considered. Third level of control, very interesting, was the academic world. The academic world pretended to be independent. In fact, it was just a scientific backing, a smoke screen. When you deal with very complex from algorithm, from a complex from a combinatorial point of view, it is totally impossible to store all the internal states, to study them. It is totally impossible. And in fact, the lack of proof of insecurity becomes de facto a proof of security. Read all the scientific paper. In fact, what they call provable security is just the inability to prove insecurity. In fact, who are ruling the game? The industry and the nation states. That's why you have only AES 256 in all equipment, software, and so on. Very interesting about, it is a Ross estimation, but which is probably rather accurate. Only 20% of cryptographic research is published. Even in our lab, we don't publish anything we find. So you could say, okay, indeed, the academic community is independent. No, because in fact, there are a lot of ways to control it. The publish or perish effect. If you analyze the way papers are selected, you have to follow some fashion topics, or some topics are systematically rejected. For example, Boolean functions, and some modelization of discrete mathematics. The control by money. Have a look to IT security papers. You find at the bottom NSF, National Science Foundation grant. National Security Agency grant. You can go on the NSA website and you will find all the scientific projects that the US DoD and NSA are financing. So the question is, are you really free to search and publish on on any kind of topic? The answer is no. I'm not sure that anyone would find a polynomial time factorial algorithm could do it. So, if we come back to cryptography industry after World War II, in fact, you have still nowadays most of the processing crypto machine and crypto equipment in the world. And of course, there are many people, 2 or 3 countries who are missing, very surprisingly. I would like to come back to the case of Crypto AG. It is a case that I know I have worked on during many years. In fact, during the last 50 years, Crypto AG, a Swiss company, so Switzerland, it is only the country of chocolate and cocoa and cheese. It was the country of crypto machines for governmental use. It was they hold 90% of the market. Around 120 countries were using a crypto machine from Crypto AG. And in 1995, the Hans Buller case, thanks to the Iranian government, in fact, changed the face of the world regarding cryptography. You have here, so it was a top representative of Crypto AG, and he revealed that in fact, during 50 years, all the crypto machines sent to 120 countries were trapped at the implementation level or the mathematical level. And you should read his book. It was long before Julian Assange, a whistleblower. So of course he was a little bit forced because he has been jailed in Iranian jail during 9 months. And this made him very talkative, but well. I would like to show you what is a mathematical trapdoor. Just an example, which is of course anonymized. No, sorry, it is here. It is mathematics. How to hide trapdoors being in plain light. Just publish the algorithm. but makes the mathematics very difficult. It is a trapdoor. It would be possible to, if we have time, to explain to you a lot of things. Sorry for this. Okay. So, 1992 was a good year. Remember, Biam and Shamir published a differential cryptography attack. Very surprisingly, remember at that time only the DES, Data Encryption Standard, published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology with the help with the NSA. In fact, all the algorithm block cipher were inspired from DES. With differential cryptography, cryptanalysis, all avatar of DES have been broken more or less efficiently. Except DES, we are still resistant from a practical point of view. And of course, the NSA recognized they were a little bit embarrassed. They say, oh, sorry, we knew about that differential cryptography 20 years ago. The official birth of DES was in 1977, but 1992 minus 20, it makes at least 5 years ago. Very interesting. So the EAS contest, I attended to this contest, and it was clear that the standard, the mandatory standards was block ciphers. So now, from a practical point of view, how to hide trapdoors? There are different levels, different way of doing it. Of course, you have it strongly depends on the context, the scientific context, the computing power environment, and so on. So you have to forecast many things. For example, remember that during the AES contest, the algorithm must be secure for at least 30 years until 100 years. You can read the technical documentation and the political documentation of the AES contest. It is written inside. Well, so you have to do a lot of interpolation and forecast. First, of course, between the first phase, it was very easy. There was no academic community. Everything was obscure, security by obscurity, just buy and trust me. So it was very easy. And of course, we come back to the crypto ID case. So in fact, the backdoor were very rather weak mathematical implementation of backdoors and sometimes only implementation. But hackers came into the play and reverse engineering techniques, first software and the wonderful IDEA Pro, and more recently even hardware reverse. Remember the work of Starbug and Carsten Knoll, Philips? It was very, how to say that? Difficult for Philips when the MIFARE algorithm has been reversed. They say, oh, it is hidden in silicium. It is secure. No, because hackers are very inventive, innovative. So in fact, keeping the cryptographic design secret is a nonsense, because now you can find it. So you have to hide at a lower level, at the mathematical level. It can be in protocols, well, GSM, RC4, web, and so on, even TCP/IP. There are many different ways to hiding things, for example, with cover channel and so on. You can claim for developers' mistake incompetence to hide trapdoors, and it is interesting because if you patch the vulnerability, there are always new ones coming. So you won't be disappointed. You will have always vulnerabilities. What is interesting that the work of hackers are more and more are able to propose and to find most of these trapdoors. So you have to go low at the even lower level mathematics. So how to work? In fact, First, remember that the operating system aspect is very important if you want to retrieve the key. Most of the time, the police is not focusing on the encrypted text. He is looking in some files where you will find some information about the key. Of course, the best solution, the most difficult but the best solution, is mathematical trapdoors. First, it's very interesting to consider that the federal document FIPS 140 has become some sort of a standard in order to evaluate your random quality of your cryptographic algorithm. Standardization of mind. That's why most of the G8 countries use their own secret statistical evaluation. AES, just a number. If you want to analyze AES, you have to consider 2 to the power 256 sets of 2 functions, each set containing 2 to the power 256 block. There will be never sufficient number of computers in order to store and analyze that. So you have here one of the possible roadmap. Sorry, it's a little bit mathematical. We are working in my lab on that. A roadmap to how to the general principle to hide a mathematical trapdoor. You work in some reference set. You do a polynomial time transformation, but going back to the original set is difficult from a computational point of view. So we have a lot of PhD theses for anyone interested, and we are going to launch a project in order to build a combinatorial trapdoor framework in order to prove that it is possible to hide trapdoors in block ciphers. So as a conclusion, of course, it would have been possible to say many things, but you can contact me, I can give you many information. I think that we cannot be, in France we have an expression, we cannot be a business world. In other way, we must not be naive. You have IT equipment everywhere, in hospital, in traffic light management, in everywhere. Now all lives are managed and are depending from IT and IT services, IT equipment. And of course, for nation states, it's a very critical issue to control everything. So it should be a national strategic issue. We have every country, like France, should remain independent, or at least Europe. Well, I don't know whether we have to include some countries in Europe who are more US related, but well, it's no problem. Keep your mind open. There is no scientific orthodoxy. Everything is interesting. That's the big difference between the hackers world, which is very open, still now, and the academic community, which is very, well, some one-eyed and very blind. We have to keep our mind very open. There is no bad ideas, only ideas that are working or not. And I'm convinced that having a large hacker community will be a critical national issue for every country who would be interested in that. I think that the best example is Germany. Germany, from the very early of 1980, has organized its hacker community in a very interesting way. And, well, I think that the future should not be in multinational hands. It's a society issue. It must be in your hands, in my hands, in every citizen's hands. We cannot subcontract our security to multinationals. And very recently with the PRISM project, there are the counter PRISM project. I strongly advise you to go. You have the choice. You are free not to use Facebook, not to use Apple, not to use Microsoft. be aware that there are alternatives. But the security is your issue, is your problem. It is a citizen issue. So you have to decide and to be very active. Don't let other people to think for you and to take decisions for you. Quite in time. So if you want to have more documents in technical information, contact me. No question? So the slide will be available. I will see with the organizer how to make them public.